And good evening. We are going to go ahead and get started, inshallah. My name is Asjad Hamid, and I'm the Government Affairs and Development Director for CARE Ohio. And I am joined by our brand new Outreach Director, and I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Thank you. Okay, this is not very long, so I'm just going to stand over here. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Amina Barhoumi. Most of you guys know me from here, being at the masjids, and I am very lucky to join CARE as the Outreach Director. Today, in particular, we are going to be talking about something that is important and comes every decade to us here in the United States. And we have sort of details with regards to what the census is about and why it's important to us as Muslims and why it's critical in particular to us as minorities and a diverse range of minorities in terms of how even we fill out the form. I'm going to get started with a little bit of background, and then Esrad's going to continue to speak a little bit more particularly about the details of the forms and how they need to be filled out, inshallah. And I don't know how to use a clicker.
Press this button to click over.
Okay,
Right.
perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so what is the census? The census comes to us every 10 years, and it's a mandate basically in the U.S. Constitution that essentially states that every single person in the United States needs to be counted. So we're talking about over 300 million people counted in the United States, not just in terms of numbers, but even in terms of details of whom they are. And this is really critical because it's essentially a photograph of what our country, the United States of America, looks like at that point in time. And that's so important because over time, the demographics really change. And so it's critical to be able to take account of that. And what's even more important, and oftentimes not realized, is that the census is not just about a count and what kind of United States we have in terms of people, but even more so in terms of allocation of, and there's a range, 675 billion, more than 700 billion, depending on which agency you ask, but a lot of money to be allocated to our local communities, basically in accordance to what the population is. We often hear, because either every 2 years or every 4 years, voting is a critical component in terms of being a United States citizen or being part of the fabric of America. What we don't realize, too, that it is essentially our civic duty, too, as well, as people residing in the United States, regardless of our immigration status. And actually, it is also, we are legally obligated to fill out the census. And so the 2020 census is not a form to be filled out by just someone who pays their taxes or someone who's been in the country for a particular number of years. It's literally for anyone that eats, sleeps, lives on U.S. soil, regardless of immigration status, even if you're an asylum seeker, if you have relatives living within your home, even if they don't make their own money, even if they're just a month old, you have a newborn baby, everyone counts. And that's really a critical component to the 2020 census, or the census in particular. So there's a short video here that's a little bit of an overview. And so the hope is to give kind of like a snapshot. It's put on here, particularly if there were younger kids that were watching, but we're going to go ahead and play it. It's very short. Is there no sound? Okay. So if there's no sound, we're going to skip it because we're going to go over this stuff anyways. So why is the U.S. Census so important? It literally shapes who we are, or shapes literally the future of our country and what it looks like. let's take, for example, here we live in the Hilliard School District, or people in the community live in the Dublin School District. Often there's parents that complain that the student-to-teacher ratio is way too high. Or that there's not enough events or activities at school, or enrichment activities are not available, or money allocated to special needs kids is not available, or special lunch programs or food programs. And so the US Census is what determines what kind of money is sent where and to which schools. And so if we're not filling out the census correctly, oftentimes then we become misrepresented, not just in a count, we get misrepresented in terms of budgets and how much money gets allocated where. In terms of housing, how many homes are built. And so these numbers are used for like long-term strategic planning for towns and for cities and urban areas, social programs that are available within our community, infrastructure, roads, transportations, like the road on Riggins that, you know, again, when it was paved and opened up a way for a shorter route for people that come in from Dublin, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because these numbers matter. And then further, the census ensures that we have accurate representation in DC and accurate representation in DC. And so districting and district lines can be defined in accordance to how many people reside in particular areas. And so these are actually a critical component to how the numbers are used in the census. And it essentially also determines, for instance, for Ohio on a national level is very much at the center of stage during national elections. And it's the number of legislators that represent us in DC is determined by how many people report that they live in Ohio. And so CARE Ohio estimates that there's upwards of around 200,000 Muslims in Ohio, and that's an important number because within that number, we are oftentimes undercounted. And we're undercounted because we have minorities within our ranks that are frequently undercounted in the US Census for a variety of reasons, and that's something that Esther's going to speak about a little bit later, and how we make sure that we are not undercounted. And essentially, as you know, American Muslims, it's really critical that we, again, we count and we answer the census in a way that really represents us, because the allocation provides low-income Ohioans for vital government programs. We have fair representation in Congress. That our school programs are funded, particularly ones that subsidize school lunches, etc. And so there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just about who we are and what we look like in terms of the United States of America, but even more so, it impacts us locally, and the numbers don't change for another decade. And so it's really critical that we make the right decision in filling out this form that really just takes 10, 15 minutes. Again, the concept of representation, you're going to hear this over and over again, because we really want everyone here to walk out knowing exactly that it's really important to fill it out and to make the time, because we all know that you guys have busy lives. We all do, and we're oftentimes forgetful. And so sitting in front of you actually are postcards. So make sure you fill those out. There's some girls that are walking around, and we'll make sure that those are mailed to you very close to when the census, you receive the letter for the census. And so minorities are oftentimes undercounted. And they're undercounted for a variety of reasons, but mostly because the census is not filled out correctly. And unfortunately, there were recommendations made to the agency to be able to include details of information on the form, so that way minorities such as Arab Americans from different backgrounds, Asian Americans from different backgrounds, African Americans, African immigrants are represented in a way that's correct. And so until we fill it out in a way that is conducive to who we really are and who we represent, we're going to be lost into the mix. And at the end of the day, the representation that we have in Congress or the representation that we have in DC needs to be reflective of who we are as a nation, right? And so that's another reason why it's so critical to be able to fill out the census. And we went over this before, but what's something else that's really important is the raw data that's used for the census is used not just for governments and allocation, but even used for like broad long-term planning for businesses in terms of investments. And so if you were, say, to open up a shop, or you wanted, to take an initiative to, buy a strip mall, there's a lot of research that's involved in making sure that, is this a good idea? Is this, a feasible, business venture? And so this data is also used for that. And so the more that the count is accurate in terms of what kind of people you would be serving, the better off it is even for the broader sort of economic, abilities of our nation. And I am going to give this to Esched, who's going to present everyone with the details of the census.
Thank you, Amina. So, like you all heard, brothers and sisters, if you complete the census, it has a direct benefit to you and your family. So, for example, for those who have kids, right, if you all complete the census form, you are increasing the chance that your child's school district will get the funding it needs to be able to provide quality education. Does that make sense? So for people who live in Dublin, if every single person in Dublin fills out the census correctly, that means that Dublin City schools are going to have a lot of funding. And that is exactly what not just Muslims need, but really everyone needs, because obviously we all want to make sure that our youth are being provided a high quality education. So there are 3 ways to complete the census. You can complete it by mail, online, or by phone. And so everyone should receive a census form by mid-March with a code that will allow you to complete it online or by mail. So this is how it will look when you get it in the mail, the census letter. And this is the actual sort of census form as you are filling it out. So I know that some folks, I know some political campaigns, for example, will send out forms and say, oh, this is part of the census, or they'll use the word census. It's not. So that's just something to be mindful of, is that any census mail you receive will begin arriving in mid-March. Now, this is how the form will look online. Now, as I mentioned, when you receive the letter, you will have a little code as well as a URL to go online and to complete the form. And it's also available in 12 different languages as well when you go online to complete the form. Now, if for whatever reason you do not get the piece of census mail that has the code, you can still go online and complete the form. So, probably one of the biggest questions that members of our community have when it comes to the census is how to fill out the question about race. How should our community, members of our community, identify themselves on the census form? Now, in the past, many Arab members of our community, they were advised to fill out the form by identifying themselves as white. Thank you. To identify themselves as white. And so if you get the census form, for example, when you see the different sort of methods of answering the race question, it'll have Italian, Irish, Lebanese. The reason why Arabs are lumped into that category, it is a long, long story, but for the sake of what we recommend our community to do is we recommend members of our community that are Arab to fill out the box that says other, and then just to put in your country of origin. So you would check off some other race on the form, and then if you're Palestinian, you'd put Palestinian. Same thing for our folks who are Iranian or Afghan. Now, the reason why we are asking people to identify this way, well, at least for Arabs, that's what the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee recommends, and so that's what we're recommending. But the reason why it's important to identify yourself properly on this part of the form is that communities in America, they all have different challenges. So, as we all know, let's say, for example, African Americans in America face a very different set of challenges than white people in America. It could be that people who are Malaysian face a completely different set of challenges. And so by filling this out properly, you are allowing institutions and the government to study these problems. And so if you look at a country like France, France doesn't have anything like this. And so unfortunately, they are unable to study issues of discrimination. They are unable to study issues of poverty that may be unique to a particular community or another particular community. They are just simply unable to really dig down deep into the data and find out how are different people in their country just experiencing life and what are they going through. And so if we fill this out properly, we are helping our communities to really just live more prosperous lives in America. And for this information, we actually have created handouts, and we will be distributing them on social media. We have created graphics, which we will be distributing next week, inshallah, but we also have some handouts that have all this information on the care table out in the lobby. So for our brothers and sisters who identify as Black or African American or African, there is the Black or African American box. You would check that and you would put your country of origin. Same thing for our brothers and sisters who identify as South Asian or Southeast Asian. So in my case, my parents are Pakistani, so I would check off other Asian, and then I would write in Pakistani. And at the end, we'll have time for questions as well. Now, this is how the form will look online if you're filling out the race question. And we have included this to basically show that you can fill out multiple races. Because there are obviously not just members of our community, but people in America in general who are made up of different races. We have people who are Black and white. We have people who are Pakistani and Indian. We have people who are Arab and Pakistani. The list goes on. And so you can actually fill out on the form multiple races. And so as I had discussed before, it is critical that we identify ourselves correctly so we can study the different challenges that our communities face. Now for college students, this can be kind of tricky. So for college students, when it comes to voting, many students will vote at their parents' address, but will sleep and live, let's say, on or near their college campus. For the census form, the U.S. Census Bureau recommends that students count themselves, that they fill out the census form where they basically spend most of their time sleeping. So if you have a college student that lives in a dorm, they should complete the census form with their college or university. And so their parents should not count their child who lives in a dorm at a university on their own census form. And so the college student will work with their university to complete the census form. So again, if you have a child that lives in an apartment near their campus, you would not count them on the form that comes to your home. And going back to what Sister Amina was saying, everybody is counted that lives at your address. Children under 5, grandparents, cousins, relatives, everyone living in your household. Now, one of the things that marginalized people in America worry about, and they should, and it makes sense for them to worry about it given the history of this country, is the protection of their information. And what information are they sharing with the government? Is it going to be protected? Just to get a few things out of the way, the president was trying to include a question about citizenship status. That question is not going to be on the census. So the census form will not ask you about whether or not you're a citizen. It won't ask you about your religion. And the information will not be shared with the FBI, with DHS, with ICE, or with the CIA. So this is secure information. And again, it is important that all of us fill out this form. So thank you all for listening. And as Sister Amina had said before, we were distributing census cards. And so the purpose of those cards, brothers and sisters, is we understand that, all of us are busy people. Many of you have families, and so life can get hectic. And so we just want you all to please fill out those cards so we can then send them back to you closer to the date of when the census letters will begin being distributed, just to remind you all to please fill out the census form. And again, at the care table in the lobby, we have a handout that folks can take home if they'd like. And next week, inshallah, we will begin sharing more information on social media. Okay. Yes. Sure. So the question was about the MENA category. So to my understanding, MENA was not a category on the census. There were Arab groups in. Yes. So there were Arab groups that were lobbying the Census Bureau to include the category MENA. MENA stands for Middle East or North African. And so there were census groups that were trying to have a MENA category included. So if you go back, just to sort of give you a visual of what we're referring to, right? So here we have white, black, American Indian, Asian, some other race. There were Arab American groups that were lobbying the federal government to include a category that said MENA, Middle East or North African. However, they, for a number of reasons, were just not able to get it to be part of this form. And so as a result, you have those same Arab American groups encouraging Arabs living in the U.S. to check some of the race and then to fill out their country of origin.
In terms of MENA, you could argue against the category in itself being one that's not representative of Arab Americans in general, right? So there's an issue with MENA to begin with. To your question about how would that be reflective and is it a worthy fight? When the lobbying did occur to include MENA, it was very begrudging, right? So it was because MENA was a category that the borough would identify as something that they could put, and that's why they pushed for it. So when it didn't happen, they had to come up with an alternative. And frankly, this alternative is more representative of who we are. So, the synopsis is, if you're in doubt, it's just write it in. Just write it in, right where you're from, because that is more representative. And what would happen is essentially it would show that as a nation we're more diverse than some people would like us to seem, right? So if you look even at the form up above, or trying to see, I don't think that it's included. So where white is, up on top, and you see in parentheses, they're including particular, like for instance, Middle Eastern countries. So for those that are not basically educated and the need to include their name in an other, you're just being counted as a white. Does that make sense? So it really dilutes the diversity of our nation, and that's not okay. And it's the case for Africans, and it's the case that's also made for Southeast Asians. There's so many Indonesians and so many Malaysians and so many Pakistanis, but essentially not being counted by just taking the broader view. So the effort is likely in education, and so I think that that's likely our best bet. And that's my take, but I would appreciate what Asjad has to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much to add, but yeah, just like Sister Amina was saying, is MENA lumps a lot of different groups of people together, and so again, it could be that certain people from the Middle East deal with a completely different set of challenges than other people, and so just by writing their individual countries, it sort of at least allows for institutions and for the government to study how people from individual countries are living their lives in the U.S., as opposed to just, like just sort of a blanket label. Sister Nazi, you had a question? Sure. So the question was, if you are Egyptian, do you mark white or do you mark some other race? So if you are Egyptian and you identify as not white but as Arab, then you would fill out some other race and then you would write in Egyptian. So again, just to clarify, if you identify as Arab, you would go to the box at the bottom that says some other race, check the box, and write in your country of origin. So the question was for members of our community that are Eastern European or who may have experiences that are unlike many of our own, but they should just fill out the form as how they identify. So even if they're Muslim, if someone is Eastern European, then they should put white in their country of origin, because that is just what they are. So, like let's say if we have, Pakistanis, right? Even though many Pakistanis are Muslim, if there's if someone is Pakistani and they're Christian, they would still put other Asian and write in Pakistani. So again, the race question should be, thought about just in terms of your race. Certainly someone's religion will impact their experience, but for the census form, it is appropriate just to put your race. Do you have another question? No. So this, in terms of the recommendations that CARE Ohio has, we have come to these recommendations after doing a lot of research about what other national organizations have recommended. So NICC, the National American Iranian Council, recommends that people check off some other race and write Iranian. The Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee recommends the same thing for Arabs. So CARE National has no guidance. The guidance that we are presenting is based off of our research and what other national groups that represent specific, let's say, races of people, what they have recommended. Do you know? I don't think there is.
But they're definitely undercounted. So the question is, do we have any statistics about how Muslims are, filling out the census? We don't. No, that's really, it's because there's no religion question on the census, it's very challenging to be able to obtain. But minorities are undercounted. And there are efforts, even in the way you see the form. I mean, the form has limitations, right? And education is a huge component to make sure we fill it out correctly. If we are in a hurry and a rush, our first reaction is likely to fill out the first box that we see and not click on other, right? Because that's how our mind has been trained. And so it's really in educating the community that allows us to make sure that we are not undercounted. So I'll give you a simple example. So how does filling out the application simply affect either our students here in the school district, or let me give you another example just in terms of the refugees even that are allocated here within our city that I know a lot of the attendees have maybe reached out to be able to help. So SNAP benefits, benefits that come in terms of social services, those are all allocated in accordance to the people that are counted. And they are likely, the people who will not fill out this form or will fill it out incorrectly, right? So it's really critical, the education component in terms of how to fill it out. And then allocation of any kind of resource within the districting. So if the Dublin School District or the Hilliard School District is increasing in population, needs to build another high school, this is likely the data they'll be using instead of being in overcrowded classrooms. And so it's a very simple task, but it's very critical to be able to make sure that we take the time to be able to fill it out. Yes? That's a really good question. I think the intention of this is to, if there's a large number of other, the agency is going to be forced to be able to break it down further, right? You can't have a large percentage of other that just represent a big amount of other. So it's likely to show or prove to them, because what they use is basically take this information and build off it, right, after 10 years. So they take this data and see how it is that they can improve the form in a decade later. And so that is the intention, at least in terms of the research that I have done. But there is no MENA, right? Right, and that was a lobbying effort that was made, but it did not go through. So this is Plan B.
So, I mean, I just think it's important to remember that, certainly while a category is important, it is not the goal. The goal is to not have a category. The goal is to have accurate data and information so institutions can study the problems that are going on in America. So yeah, sure, within, certainly you could have a MENA category, but at the end of the day, everyone who falls under the MENA category, their experiences are very different. So, Well, so right, sure, but you know that, but that, respectfully, sister, rests on the assumption, right, that more funding will be given out with the MENA category, and that's not true. You know, funding does not rest on a category. Funding rests on the numbers, right? But this really has to do with research. Funding has to do with the raw numbers. So, for example, if everyone fills this out, we all count as sort of what's called a general number. However, you know, like the funding will remain the same, regardless of whether or not you all fill it out in terms of MENA or white. But again, the national organizations are recommending, especially the organizations that represent Arabs in America, again, are recommending that people fill out the other category and fill out their individual country of origin. Do you have something to add, Roman?
So Sister Saunders called me and one night, and she asked me about the census. So when I called up the next day, I called up CARE, our DC office, and they actually were asking people to fill out MENA. Now the problem was then when we called up ADC, the Anti-Arab American Defamation Committee, they were saying fill out other and then put out your country of origin. Don't put Arab, but put other and country of origin. And then Azad called up the Iranian and Afghan organizations. So here's the thing. What we have advised them, all of them, is they should say one thing. The worst thing we can do is if somebody puts MENA and somebody puts Arab and then somebody puts other and then they put the country like Egyptian. That will undercount the numbers. So the key is that we all do the same thing. And now we know that CARE National and all the CARE chapters, we've told them, they are all saying the same thing, which is being said also by the ADC, the NICC people, all the national organizations. So if we all put for now other and then the country of origin, we will not be undercounted. If you put anything else, we will be undercounted. And sister, to answer your question about grants, that's actually a very important question about grants. So I'm applying today, I've worked all day on the Ohio State Bar Foundation grant. And when you write that grant, they ask you, well, who do you serve? And they want to know number of people. Well, we can't. Religion, they just don't. So when we apply for the grant, so the Ohio State Bar Foundation grant, they want to know exactly how many people do you serve, how many people does CARE Ohio serve, which would be all the people from MENA, and from some from South Asia, and some from those. So right now, there are no numbers, actually. So the hope is that with the census, if everybody fills out correctly, then we can look at census data and say in Ohio that this many number of people who put in country of origin, which are the MENA countries, right? Because they're going to write now Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, right? So this would actually be very helpful for grants, for health purposes, for legal purposes, any grant anybody's applying. If we all consistently write the same thing, all of us in the country, that would really help us in getting grant money. Because right now the problem is that because there's no religion, we can't prove how many of us are there, from these countries. So the plan is that we printed out these flyers, and I was going to come at Jummah and make an announcement, but obviously we have, probably over 100 masajid in Ohio. So the plan is that we have these flyers now, how to fill out, and the flyer just talks about only this part, how do you fill out if you're Pakistani or you're Egyptian, Moroccan, whatever, right? Iranian, Afghan. So our plan is that we will have announcements made in masajid across Ohio. I mean, we can do it in Columbus, obviously I can do it, Azad can do it, but we'll have other people do it in other masajid in Ohio, and we will also have flyers which tell you how to do it, distributed at the masajid in the next couple of weeks. And as many as we can cover. So I know we can cover Ohio, Columbus, probably Cincinnati, but yeah, it'll be tough to do all the masajid in Ohio, but we'll try, inshallah. And obviously we're going to do on social media. We have a flyer now on Facebook. Hopefully people will distribute that.
So, Lubna, go ahead, and then... Africans? I don't know that.
Yeah, so the question is, how should people who are African fill out the census form? Is that correct? So we recommend, well, not we, but the recommendation from the National Arab Organization is, if you are Arab, to fill out other. However, for the census form, the sort of recommendation is to put black or African American, and then in the box you can put your country of origin. Yeah, so Egypt, sure, what, right, so, I mean, certainly, well, no, so, but this is an important question, is that, for people who are from Egypt or Sudan, what should they put? I mean, it is certainly a difficult question to answer. I mean, again, if someone identifies as an Arab, then they should check some of the race and then put in their country. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, a comment was made is that handing out the flyers is insufficient to sort of properly share information about the census. Which, yes, absolutely, you are correct. So that is why we will be taking a multifaceted approach. We'll be handing out flyers. We'll be sharing on social media, and also talking with Masajid leaders about the census. A radio channel? No, I did not. Yeah, an app. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, again, this is a community effort, and so we will be trying to get creative in terms of sharing this information and making sure that everyone is aware. But certainly, a lot of the people here are, alhamdulillah, community leaders. People know you, and so certainly, all of us can also play our own individual part in sharing information and just making sure that all the people in our own households are counted as well. All right, here, you want to say?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a wrap. It's already 9. We didn't think we'd be speaking for this long about the census. So Allah jazakum al khair for coming. And if you have any further questions, we have a table outside with some of those handouts and other care materials. Inshallah. Jazakum al khairan.